Hey YouTube. I keep getting asked what my favorite leaders to get in Arena are, so I figured I'd throw together this quick little Arena tier list for the leaders. First up, we have the Tier 1 leaders. I think these are substantially better than the Tier 2 leaders. They generally don't require you to get any specific cards, they're just always good. So Uprising, anything that swarms, there's a lot of cards that swarm. It's very easy for the Scytheman that comes out off your leader ability to be worth 12 plus points. In addition, you can use Uprising to just protect engines and do things that you would do with some other leaders like Morvran. Gurney plays for a ton of points over the course of a game, easily like 15 plus, depending on how many tall units you have, if you have any consumes, anything like that. It's one of the best leaders for pushing and playing multiple rounds, and a lot of arena decks are trying to get by on like 12 to 13 golds, and when you force them to play a full 16 card game, they sort of fall apart. And Gurney is the best leader at making a really long game. Then we have Brewer, which might be a little bit of a surprise for people that play mostly constructed, but in Arena, there's a lot of row-locked engines that see play, stuff like Black Rayla, Pavco Gale, all that kind of stuff. To the point where having 3 charges that move something off of the row that it wants to be on is very similar to just having 3 removal cards in your leader. Additionally, you get to set up things like Lacerates, you get to set up like a big Dragon's Dream, but most of the time, even if you have those cards in your deck, you just want to use your leader charges to disrupt your opponent's engines, because there's so many different things that are row-locked in Arena. Moving on, we have the Tier 2 leaders. I have, first up is Imperial Formation, the Morvran ability. This is an 8-point leader that you can use in a bunch of different ways. You can either save it for round 3 in order to get a bigger finisher. You can protect your engines in order to, well, protect your engines in a long round. Additionally, it's very granular, so if your opponent's bleeding you, you can use part of your leader in order to maintain your card or to push for card advantage in round 2. You're not usually going to have a Fawn, but even without a Fawn, when it's just two charges spread out 4 times, this is a very potent leader to have in Arena. Then we have Imposter. Like with Brewer, there's a lot of row-locked engines in Arena. Imposter is a leader that lets you answer your opponent's engine while also putting that engine in play yourself. Additionally, there's stuff like Old Spear Tip that sees a lot of play. Imposter lets you just basically plays as a 11 to 14 point leader on just big vanilla dudes. But the big strength of this card is your opponent is either discouraged from playing their engines in round 3, or just has to mulligan their engines out of fear of theirs getting locked and you getting a copy of it yourself. Then we have Carapace, which sort of does everything that Morvran does, just worse than Morvran does. It's worth 6 points instead of 8. The shield is a little better at protecting engines, but it's also less granular. So, while Morvran can protect engines and also does other stuff, Carapace protects engines, and that's really all it does. That said, protecting engines is a really powerful thing to be doing in Arena, so I still have it sitting nice in Tier 2. Then we have Reckless Flurry, the Herald ability, which is 8 damage distributed randomly. I have this above the Vicious Slash and Blood Money abilities. All 3 of them deal 8 damage. These are better at killing engines, but Reckless Flurry combos with stuff like Dagger and combos with Greatsword. Additionally, the way Reckless Flurry works is, while it doesn't directly remove things later on into the round as well, it still discourages your opponent from playing their engines early. And if you have just like Regis's or Enraged Ifrits, they can deal the 4 point of damage. Oftentimes, you're going to be able to like play that and then use your Reckless Flurry to clean up the thing that you damaged. So if they play like a Pavco Gale and you have 4 damage in your hand, you can play your 4 damage effect on the Pavco Gale and then use the Reckless Flurry to finish it off. So it still sort of works as a removal leader. But additionally, you have all these other cards that combo well with it, which just put it a little bit above the other slightly more reliable deal 8s. Moving on to Tier 3, we're starting off with Lockdown, the Usurper ability. A lot of people seem to think this ability is a lot better than it is, but really with Lockdown, if you have one of the abilities that's really good, you'd always rather have that ability. And if you have one of the abilities that's worse, then yeah, you'd rather have Usurper. But generally, you prefer to have just a good leader than to just trade leaders with your opponent. So I have it in Tier 3, which is above most of the leaders in the game. There's a lot of stuff in the Tier 4 and below category. But generally, I'd much rather have one of the leaders above it. Next up, we have Double Cross, which is another leader that I think a lot of people overrate. This is a leader that you're usually going to play in the middle of round 3. If you hold on to it too long, then your opponent just gets to play all of their gold cards early. But it's also, like, oddly bleedable, where if you don't know if you're going to get 2-0'd, you have to use it before your opponent plays their last card. Otherwise, you're risking, like, just dying with your leader still up. Additionally, you get in these weird spots where it just like shows you a bunch of bronzes and your leader plays for like 7 points. On average, it's probably slightly... It's pretty similar to the deal 8 leaders. And sometimes you high roll and like take your opponent's botchling or something if you play it early. But I haven't been impressed with Double Cross the more I've played with it, so I have it sitting in tier 3. Then we have the best of the token leaders with Deadeye Ambush. This makes 3/3-power elves. And there's a lot of cards in Arena that reward you for going wide. You can pick up Bone Talismans, you can boost up the tokens and play like Visigurd, you can get Eternal Fire Priest. All the leaders that make tokens are a little bit better than they are in just constructed because of all the cross-faction synergies that exist with tokens. So I have Eldain as the best one of those. And in general, you can just save it for round 3. It's a 9-point leader. Pretty solid. Doesn't represent removal, doesn't protect engines like Morbrand, but the worst case for this ability is pretty good. Next, we have Patricidal Fury, which is a leader that mostly you're trying to combo with things. Either you can play it with Row Punish, or you can play it with, if you get like a Glusty Warp, it's insane. It turns on Bloodthirst effects, so it lets you draft Spinriga a lot more safely. It makes Champions Charge a lot better. And the worst case for it, again, as with the rest of these leaders, even when you don't hit your combos, it's still fine, right? You're always playing Patricidal Fury for at least 8 points. Well, it's going to be 8 points on a single tall unit, that when it gets tall removal, you gave your opponent 3 points. It's still a respectable amount of value, even if you miss your combos. And the potential to hit combos is what puts it in tier 3. Next is Blood Scent. Same idea. 9-point leader, combos with Orianna, stuff like that. Puts it in tier 3. Then we have Overwhelming Hunger, which is a leader that I'm not entirely sure where to place. There's a few cards that it combos really well with, and when it's bad, it's just a 6-point leader. I think most of the time you're going to be able to get some Death Wishes in order to make this leader worthwhile, but you're looking for some pretty specific stuff. It's like, you have Succubus, you have Imperial Manticore, you have Detlaf, which is great, you have Ruhin, which is pretty good, and then it's mostly bronzes. I feel like there's not enough cards that combo with Overwhelming Hunger in the pool, especially cross-faction, to the point where I can put it higher given the 6-point floor on it. But that said, that might change as I play with it more. I haven't had the opportunity to play with it very much. Now we have the tier 4 leaders. First up is Pincer Maneuver. The condition on this card isn't too bad. You're usually going to have NR cards. You usually have like 3 or 4 in your deck. While it can brick in round 3, your opponent can force your NR cards out. When it works, it's a pretty good leader. It's basically a Royal Decree, just tacked on. Lets you play multiple cards in a turn, which is rarely but occasionally relevant in Arena. You have Congregate, same idea as Eldain. Usually you can pick up a Spenders if you know early on you're going to have coins. So you should be able to get 9 points out of this leader. Again, cards combo with Swarm. Rocket Swarm, same idea. Lots of Swarm payoffs. Especially like Tourney Shelmar is incredible with a Rocket Swarm. 2 points per Arrakis. Then there's stuff like Sacred Flame, works really well with a Rocket Swarm. Just the sheer volume of tokens. Getting 5 instead of 3 is a pretty big deal. Makes organic cards slightly better, and some organic cards are already pretty good, like Manticore Venom, Hideous Feast. Cards that you'd be willing to take anyway, but this leader just kind of puts it over the top. Then there's Force of Nature. Again, some more cards combo with this. There's stuff like Sheldon Skaggs and Ithlin, but for the most part, you're just playing it for your round 3 finisher. Then you have Mobilization, which is the highest of the high roll abilities in the game. Either it works and it's insane, or it's really bad and you have no leader. If you pick Hensel a lot, you're going to be breaking quite a few contracts. But when you hit, oh man, you hit big. Lastly, in tier 4, we have Brand's ability, Sacrificial Vanguard. You're really hoping to get like a Morkvarg or a Skirmisher, but even if you don't, it plays for 3 points, which sounds bad, but you're also upgrading some of your bronzes. So in round 1, you basically thin your deck a card, then in round 2, you get to thin another card. Hopefully you're like upgrading one of your bronzes to a gold over the course of the game with a leader, which adds a few more points. Usually turning one of your 4-point cards into like a 7-point card, 3 extra points, 6-point leader. Not great. You're really hoping to get that Morkvarg, you're hoping to get those Skirmishers. But it's only so bad, right? And when you hit, it's great. Like, discarding a Morkvarg is a huge game. 6 points in round 3 plus the thinning that you got earlier. And lastly, there's just all these other leaders, which are kind of junk. We got Eithne, which is a 5-point leader that represents some removal. The best of the junk leaders, not incredible. Puts a thing in play. Maeve's ability, Royal Inspiration, I think? I haven't played it since the rework. Not entirely sure. But Meave's ability, which is the boost 1 by every 2 turns, it's just so bad in a long round 3. It's incredibly bleedable. It's not enough value early on. It's like everything that Gurney is, but so much worse that it's not even good anymore. Same thing with Croc. It completes your removal. It's a little more awkward because your opponent can play like artifacts or immune units, or they play like armored stuff early in the round and you just don't get value on your leader at all. I've played plenty of Croc rounds where in round 3 my leader just gets like 3 points and my opponent is more ran and I get run over by whatever they're doing. Looks a lot better than it is, and it doesn't even look very good. Next up is Invigorate. Again, an incredibly bleedable leader. If you use it round 1, then you're committing a bunch of your points into round 1. If you try to save it for round 3 and you lose round 1, then all of a sudden you're getting bled for a lot and you have a 3-point leader in round 3. It's not where you want to be. It's one of the most exploitable leaders in the game. Bad and constructed for the same reason it's bad in Arena. Next, Mahakam Forge. Tempering is not an exciting card, and that's basically all it is in Arena when you can't build around it. Next up is Tactical Decision. This is, I think, lower than a lot of people might expect. I do have it lower than some pretty bad leaders, but that's just because in round 3, usually your deck is going to be full of junk. So a lot of the time, you're going to use your Calvé ability. It's going to show you bronze, 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 and you're going to play like a 5-point card out of it. Generally, that's worse than than these. Maybe it's slightly better than Mahakam Forge, but I don't know. Mahakam Forge can protect engines. It doesn't reliably do anything. Basically, it's good when your deck is already very good, and if your deck is very good, you don't need a great leader. Next up is Second Wind, which has very few cards that it works well with, and it makes you want to commit golds into earlier rounds. So you have to find your early Skellig golds, and then you gotta play them in round 1 just to get value on your leader later. Overall, not where you want to be, especially when there's only a few cards that you really want to revive. There's like Olaf, Wild Boar of the Sea. A couple bronzes like Svalblood Priest can be worth bringing back, but you're not even guaranteed to get a card you want to bring back when you pick Second Wind. It's honestly probably easier to get a Hensel target than it is to get a good Second Wind. Especially since you have to play your Second Wind target in round 1 or 2. So if you miss it in this first 2 rounds, your leader's not doing anything either. Next up we have the Syndicate abilities, which just make coins. You'll go quite a few drafts either without finding any spenders or going games without drawing your 1 or 2 spenders in your deck, to the point where they're just so unreliable and the ceiling is low enough on them anyway that they're really not good. When you high roll and hit a bunch of spenders, they can be alright, but most of the time, I mean, what's the ceiling on Jackbot? You hit like a Sea Jackal, and even that's not really that good, because the Sea Jackal is 4 base, so it's like you get 2 extra bonus points on the Sea Jackal. When you chain a bunch of things and you build like the full Syndicate deck, when you get like Bincies and Igors and Townsfolks and Tax Collectors, then these abilities can come together, but it doesn't happen often enough that I would really ever take one of these abilities over one of the ones above it. Unless I'm like trying to farm YouTube content and I'd rather take a Syndicate ability in hopes to high roll than a more boring, slightly better ability like a Phila. Lastly, we have Mystic Echo, which works with basically 2 cards in the game. You get Call of the Forest and you get Waters of Broccolon. The rest of it's really underwhelming. You can't really take it with Novigrad Injustice because you're not going to have enough Dwarfs in your deck most of the time. And, yeah, plenty of the time you're going to pick this leader. Maybe you'll have a Rebuke. And, yeah, you're really trying to high roll for exactly Waters of Broccolon. Lastly, we have the trash abilities, which are basically just leaders that are incompatible with what's going on in Arena. They require a little bit too much of your card selections. Stuff like Foltest wants you to have multiple cards that are NR cards with orders. Demavend wants you to have multiple charge takers. Dana, which requires a bunch of different Scoia'tael tags in order to do anything. Ursine Ritual, which needs things that benefit from getting damaged. There's a couple cards that fill this role, but like almost all of them are in Skellige, and there's not enough of them to reliably have a good Svalblood deck. While it's kind of a meme in Constructed, they do the 1-point leader. In Arena, a lot of the time, he will end up being a 1-point leader. Enslave, which is almost always just Swears with no 3-point body, because you're not going to have 4 tactics. Line Pockets, 5 coins, worse than the other spenders, or worse than the other coin generating leaders. Wildcard, you need to pick Crimes. If you pick up like a Tavern Brawl, it can be alright. But it's got the same problems the other spenders have, and it's less reliable, because you need to not only get things to spend the coins, but you need to pick up the crimes as well. Blaze of Glory, again, just not enough cards that work well with it. You need to find a Skellige card that has high power in order for it to play as like an Ada or a Horson. A Strategic Withdrawal, which... Ugh. Very few cards do much Strategic Withdrawal. You're basically looking for Ramen, Vigo, or it's just replaying a bronze with +2 points. Not the most exciting. And then Death Shadow, which, similar to Overwhelming Hunger, just doesn't have enough cards that work well with it. Even in Constructed, there's few things that you want to use this on. It's pretty much just Corinthier, and occasionally Plague Maiden. In Arena, you don't have access to those cards consistently, and it's just not even that good when you hit it. Like, what are you Corinthiering in Arena, right? Anyway, just figured I would post this. I will have a link to this graphic in the video description. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time.